Here.
Commissioner Hayon?
Here.
Commissioner Rennie?
Here.
The only item on the agenda is consideration of amendments to CFRO. Mr. St. Croix, would you like to introduce this?
Yeah, hopefully this is a great simplification over what we expected to do today. So I'm going to ask you to more or less ignore the memo that you got earlier this week and look at the short one that's in front of you. Although the Board of Supervisors passed out a version of the public finance proposal that the Ethics Commission adopted, there were a number of amendments included. And even though it passed the board, since then there has been some dissension among board members on all that language. So in some fairly frantic negotiations going on this week and into last night, the members of the board have come to an agreement on this, the ones that are actively involved in an alternative proposal. What that means is that it is the proposal that ethics has already adopted with the two changes in front of you, and that is reducing the overall cap of the amount in the election campaign fund from $13.5 million to $7 million. The purpose of this is to assuage concerns that there's always been a surplus in the fund and that money sits idle at a time when the city is short of money and can be used in other places. This is certainly acceptable to the staff. We can certainly work with this. Second change is the Ethics Commission actually adopted an increase in the cap for the mayoral race, and the board has decided to not increase that, but to leave it at what it is today. And again, this is something the staff is fine with working with. There's a third technical change that just recreates the formula at which point the commission staff must notify the board and the mayor that there will be a shortage in the fund, because the way it's written, there won't be a shortage in the fund when the trigger hits. We're changing the trigger so that it matches the mathematical intent. So that's really it in a nutshell. You have before you what you have already adopted with those two changes, which I think are simple to understand, and that third technical change.
Mr. St. Croix, can you describe procedurally what happens if we adopt these changes and the legislation goes forward?
The legislation will go to the Rules Committee, which we'll hear it, I believe, on April 5th.
Possible it could be late March.
Late March.
Possibly.
And then at that point, it goes back to the full board, first reading and second reading. But our understanding is that there's sufficient support at the board that this version with these changes would be adopted.
And Mr. Shen, we have sufficient confidence that although we won't be, if we don't vote on the version that was sent to us by the board originally, but instead vote on this version that was negotiated over the course of the last week, that we're not running into any procedural problems.
No. If the commission were to adopt this last set of changes that the director just presented, and these were very last-minute changes, there shouldn't be any holdup in terms of how quickly it could be enacted at the board and how quickly the Ethics Commission could implement it.
And procedurally, we're also okay with disregarding the version that had originally come down from the board, and instead using these changes.
Yeah, it's certainly within the Ethics Commission purview to make any changes it sees fit, frankly. And even if it is something that several members of the board did at least initially express support for, although obviously, as the director has explained, that seems to have changed a little bit.
Thank you.
This was satisfactorily noted.
Right.
So, Mr. Shen, your view is that this was, it was satisfactorily noticed that we were looking at changes to what we had done, and the fact that there are revisions to that, which the public still was on notice that we were addressing this topic in this level of detail today.
Yeah.
That's another kind of procedural assurance that
Yeah, procedurally, in terms of noticing this item on the agenda for the special meeting, I believe the notice is completely sufficient. And the Ethics Commission can always make changes at a legislative item at any of its meetings and still pass it out the same day. Or evening, as it usually is.
Yeah. Or early morning, as it were. Thank you, Mr. Shen. Commissioners, comments regarding the proposal?
Jack, I just, briefly on the 7 million, can you just tell us a little bit more about what the staff thinking was when you came to the conclusion that that was adequate?
Yeah, the most we've ever spent in a single race is the past mayoral race, which is 480, or 4.8 million, sorry. So that's too close to 5 million, for what we're thinking of next. So in sort of projecting forward the anticipated inflationary costs and everything, we wanted to make sure there was enough money looking forward to at least the next mayor's race. And 7 million, we costed it out at just slightly less than 7 million. So that seemed to be, we started at 5, but there was concern that just wouldn't be enough. So we recalculated and moved up that far.
A question about the conforming change in the last paragraph. Previously, the trigger was much further away from the cap, giving more time to adjust or find the money in the budget, or, if necessary, make other changes that would allow that to work. I'm just wondering what the thinking is about having the cap at 6.9, which seems pretty close and not allowing as much policy room. I realize this doesn't speak to timing, but at what the background is on that one.
I actually wasn't in the room when this figure was arrived at. The fact is that even though this stipulates a time when we are to go and indicate we need a supplemental, there's nothing constraining us from ever
Doing it earlier.
Yeah.
Right. So it's required at this point, but could be done at any point that
quite
you thought
easily.
was prudent in the budget cycles.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Mr. Shen, do you have something?
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit more on the last question presented by Commissioner Studley. In terms of that provision in 1.154B1, which the Ethics Commission needs to signal and needs additional funding prior to mayoral election, the possibility that a commission may request a supplemental appropriation is kind of permissive. If the Ethics Commission were very, very close, say we're at 6.7 million, something like that, it would still be obligated to notify the mayor and the board of that situation, but it's not mandatory that the Ethics Commission needs to go through all the hoops of actually asking for that money. For practical reasons, it just may not make sense to do so, as your question was going towards.
Understand. Thank you.
So in other words, there may not, it's possible there may not be 7 million in the fund, and ethics has no obligation to necessarily ensure that there is at least 7 million.
Right, and the Ethics Commission would be required to notify the relevant authorities, but is not required to actually go through all the steps of actually requesting that money, if it's just not practically required.
I see. Is there any mechanism for the board or the mayor to put money in the fund without a request from ethics?
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's in their budgetary authority.
Yeah.
Okay. Further questions or comments from the commissioners? Public comment?
Good morning, David Pilpel. I have not seen this before. I walked in the room and you were starting to talk about it. I asked Mr. Hill. He said he had not seen this but was vaguely aware. It would have been very helpful if this was available yesterday for someone to let the public know this is new information. I'm not sure that I can digest these changes right now. I think that that is a problem in terms of public notice and consideration of further changes to what was already a complicated proposal. I was prepared to talk about what was in the packet and made available earlier this week. So I'm sorry, I'm a little unhappy right now.
Mr. Pilpel, at the beginning of the meeting, we did address these changes and the procedural mechanism for how they came about. But Mr. St. Croix, perhaps you could provide another recap.
Well, or
quickly for
perhaps
those
staff
members
could
of the
have
public.
let the public know yesterday if this document was available.
This document was written last night after 6 p.m.
And we're considering it this morning?
There are 15 lines of changes. They're very easy to digest. This proposal is what the Ethics Commission adopted before, with 2 changes that are very simple to understand and 1 technical correction.
The negotiations, as we were advised, continued into the evening last night, and this was prepared immediately after those, not delayed from the time.
Mr. Pilpel, we saw it for the first time this morning as well.
Okay, all right. I will try to restrain my unhappiness, but I've expressed it. The technical suggestions that I had here on what's, I guess, now page 18, subsection B, with respect to insufficient funds, in addition to notifying this commission and the Board of Supervisors, I would suggest adding the mayor, both on line 6 and line 16, 17. To the extent that this suggests the possibility of a supplemental appropriation, that could originate from either the board or the mayor, or be suggested by this commission. So I think notifying both the commission, the board, and the mayor would be useful. I have no policy objection to the changes in the program structure. As I've testified before, I would use different figures, but I think these figures work as well. This is an evolving program. It's possible that there could be a future court decision that says that you can't treat incumbent and non-incumbent candidates differently, so we might have to go back and revise the formula in here to that end. But to my knowledge, there's no such decision in that regard right now. I think it's fine to handle incumbent and non-incumbent candidates in the manner proposed. Whether or not my concern about the single subject rule is still pertinent, I still think that on a policy basis, moving back the filing deadline 58 days to E-146 has the effect of extending the campaign season for 2 months, which I actually think works against one of the goals of the Commission with respect to financing of campaigns, which is to limit the expenses. So by extending the campaign season, I think that will tend to increase expenses of running for office, not decrease or keep them level, which I think is not a good idea. Why candidates should have to file in June for a November election rather than August seems to me that there are other approaches to deal with the zombie candidate issue or reduce the number of candidates or limit the number of candidates that might seek public financing under a reasonably structured program. I'll leave my comments at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Stephen Hill. Well, it's been a long road, as we all know, and yesterday was a pretty furious day. A lot of people were involved in trying to tweak things at the last second. There wasn't any intent to hide anything from members of the public or from yourselves. It's just there was a lot of concerns among some members of the board that we're doing the right thing here. And, you know, as someone who's come before you before and as an advocate for public financing, I'm not 100% happy with everything that's in this. But I think on balance, it's a good effort that we've all made here. And, you know, the standard that you're charged to look at changes like this through is, does it further the goals of the Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance? That's what any change is supposed to do. And I think looking at it through that lens, on balance, this document does that. It does a number of good things, including dealing with the zombie candidate issue. It is going to make I think the program itself more stable because it's making us more conscious of the use of public dollars. It's going to make sure that there's enough money in the fund, we hope, to finance all the candidates based on past elections. But it's also going to make it a little bit harder to get the public financing, as we know. And I think that on balance, we've struck a good package here, and so I really urge you to support it. It's we know that we need 8 votes at the Board of Supervisors, and that's a high threshold. And when you need that high of a threshold, then sometimes everybody can get what they want. And so the major substantive change that was made yesterday that I think was a very good one and worth all the back and forth and the wait was that the amendments that came over to you were going to it was going to put money into the fund in June in the middle of a campaign season. And that would have allowed the program to become a political football. And it was going to basically use a big lump sum instead of doing it year after year. And for those of us who have been around this issue for a long time, remember when a past mayoral administration raided the fund 2 years in a row and turned it into a political football. This was extremely alarming to think that the money was going to be injected into the fund in the middle of a campaign in June, which is quite late in a campaign in certain ways. So I'm pleased that we were able to get agreement to go back to the year-to-year allocation and to keep it that way, which is the way it's already been done. And it's also true that the Ethics Commission itself, its overseeing of this program, is funded by that. And so, the lower that amount gets, then the less funding the Ethics Commission has. And if you're getting it in a lump sum like that, it allows, I imagine, more difficulty in planning for staffing and all the other needs of the commission. So doing it year by year seems to be a better way for doing these sorts of things. So it allows the commissioners and the staff to plan and knowing that the money is coming each year and plan accordingly. So it's not everything I wanted, but on balance, I think it's it furthers the goals of the CFRO, and I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any further comments or questions? Is there a motion to pass the further revisions to CFRO? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Yeah.
That being the only item on the agenda, the meeting is adjourned.